podcast series by ADDitude Magazine.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's Susan Coffin at ADDitude Magazine. Thank you for joining us today. We are extremely happy to have Peggy Ramundo with us. She was a pioneer, really, one of the original writers on the topic of ADD in adults. And you probably heard of her book, which was actually first published in 1993, 20 years ago. It's called You Mean I'm Not Lazy, Stupid, or Crazy? It was co-authored with her friend and colleague, Kate Kelly. It's now in its second edition, and it's just one of the classics in adult ADHD. Peggy is going to talk about specifically how those of us adults with ADHD can manage the overwhelm that comes frequently with this condition. She's going to give us some background about how our brains work and then talk to some specific strategies, both for keeping the overwhelm from getting started and then coping with it once it does. Thanks again for joining us, and let me turn it over to you now.
Oh, I'm happy to be here and welcome everybody who's here. Of course, I was given 5 to 10 minutes to do my intro, and anybody who knows me well knows that that's quite a challenge. So I will do my very best to stick to that time frame. And also, of course, to remind everybody that in such a short period of time, I will do my very best to address your questions, but of course I'm going to have to keep those answers short just because an hour is not that much time. So please forgive me if I don't completely answer your question. I'll do my best. I put together a number of, 5 different slides that we're going to take a look at that kind of capture sort of an outline, which is also something I'm not very good at, but I did my best. Before we take a look at some of those slides, I want to talk just in general, very quick, general comments about the experience of living with ADD. For most of us, we have a lot of trouble proactively planning our lives. Instead, we do a lot of overreacting to whatever the fates are seemingly throwing at us at any particular time. Many of my clients who come to me, essentially after they finish telling me what their individual challenges are, they really can be summed up in a sentence or two, which is, I want a life that I can control. I don't want this life controlling me anymore. And having ADD, I think for many of us, is having that life experience of not feeling in control. We feel stressed a lot. Very often that stress comes from pages and pages and pages of unfinished tasks. We want to take care of them. We really want to take care of them. But somehow we just don't. Or we start them and we don't finish them. Or we don't start them at all. I remember several years back, my daughter looking over my shoulder at a to-do list I was putting together. And she said, Mom, you're not going to get this done in this lifetime. Well, I had 98 items on my to-do list. Needless to say, I really just sort of crumpled it up and threw it out because there was absolutely no way, and it was very overwhelming just looking at it. But that really is so much a part of our day-to-day experience of having great ideas and not having the ability to follow through on this. My guess is that this is the experience of many of you who are listening this afternoon. You probably do a lot of questioning about your own ability to ever get a handle on your life, to ever be able to take control of your life, or at least to some degree. And I suspect that probably what's going on as you are trying to get things done, as you are trying to knock things off your to-do list, as the stress is building, as you are having sort of a chronic experience of feeling overwhelmed, that there's a lot of old negative tapes that are playing in your head. And a lot of those tapes come from or are as the result of the attribution theory. And the attribution theory is pretty simple. Essentially, somebody sees behavior and attributes that behavior to generally, all too often, to a character flaw, to a personality problem of some kind. This is someone who is irresponsible, who is lazy, who could do it if they try, who can do it because I've seen them do it. So obviously, it's just a matter of them being lazy or passive aggressive, maybe, or oppositional. So there are all of these labels that are tossed out, that are attributed to what is observed in our trying to get through, whether it's schoolwork when we're kids, whether it's housework when we're older, whether it's projects in the workplace. What shows up looks like behavior that would fit one of those characteristics. So what happens is we end up feeling overwhelmed to start with because we can't figure out why we can't make this work. And then on top of it, we have all of this stuff rumbling around in our heads about how maybe there really is something wrong with me. You know, maybe there is something intrinsically wrong with me. I am not good enough. Maybe all of those people were right. Maybe everything they said about me was right. Because no matter how many times you may try a new strategy or try a new system, you end up feeling like a failure. You feel overwhelmed, you feel hopeless. At least in your own personal assessment, you feel like, aha, I have failed again. I am unable to do much of anything. I'm useless, and on and on and on and on. This little brief background, and I'm sure that I haven't said anything that many listeners haven't experienced in their own lives. But that really brings us to what I want to share with you today. And that is the question, what is amygdala hijacking? What does it have to do with ADD? And why should I care? Now, some of you may have some familiarity with the amygdala. If you are someone who is particularly interested in brain function, you may well know about the amygdala. It is so important, I think, and my experience has been that the information about it has been literally life-changing for many of my clients. And I want to talk a little bit about what this means. What are we talking about with amygdala hijacking? Any of us who have ADD are particularly vulnerable, susceptible to hijacking attempts by the amygdala. The amygdala is a primitive brain structure. It evolved to protect us from saber-toothed tigers. It is lightning fast. It works much faster than our prefrontal cortex can, our thinking brain. And its job is and has been for millennia to protect the body from danger. The problem is it can't distinguish between the danger of a saber-toothed tiger and the emotional danger, the emotional overwhelm that we feel, the confusion that we feel when we're faced with a complex decision. So as soon as there is any unease, as soon as we feel any stress whatsoever, our amygdala kicks in, takes over. When the amygdala takes over, it takes resources away from our prefrontal cortex. So in essence, what happens is, we're going to be protected against a saber-toothed tiger, but we can't think. We can't make decisions. Very often, I think, as we try to learn about our ADD and as we learn ways to cope with it, we get lots of self-help books. I used to laugh about how many self-help books I had on my shelf. I mean about anything and everything, looking for that strategy, that tip, that technique. Well, understanding how the amygdala works is really critically important, because what you learn from that is that the best strategy in the world is not going to work if your prefrontal cortex has been hijacked. If your amygdala has jumped in to protect, which it does at the hint of danger, emotional or physical, the resources to your thinking brain are dramatically reduced. So when you have that feeling of overwhelm, when you sit down at your desk and there are papers everywhere, or you sit down with your to-do list and you look at it and you think, I can't, or I don't wanna, I'm not gonna, maybe later, and you walk away, what's happening is it is a brain activity. It is not a personal choice. You're not choosing to be someone who is lazy. Your brain is doing what it has evolved over millennium to do. That is very, very, very important for all of us to understand, because that can help us start working with that negative self-talk that goes on all the time. And as long as that negative self-talk is going on, it is very hard for us to put systems and strategies into place, because we have already convinced ourselves that we can't do it. It's not going to work. It's never worked before. Some of the typical strategies, and I'm sure you're very familiar with these, or not strategies, the symptoms of what happens during an amygdala hijack is anxiety, overwhelm, brain fog, generalized disorganization, escalating levels of our core symptoms. And when this is going on, we have only 3 options at our disposal: fleeing, freezing, or fighting. Because that's the way the brain was designed. It was the only way to protect the species. So, overwhelm happens, you can't think, you freeze, and then we wonder why we're procrastinating. We're procrastinating because we don't have the resources going on in our prefrontal cortex. That is what's so. That knowledge about brain function is very, very important for any of you who feel like, I should be able to make myself do this. Well, it would be nice if we had a magic wand, but we don't. And willpower, that everybody just, well, I wish I had more willpower. Well, willpower is a function of higher order cognitive skills. And that is offline when we are hijacked. So what all this means is our best shot at keeping our amygdala from taking over is prevention, is interceding, is interrupting the pattern of overwhelm before it happens. Because if we can stay in our prefrontal cortex, there's a much better chance that some of these wonderful strategies we picked up along the way will actually work. So prevention is key. And there are a number of things that I listed on the slide. Things like learning about the amygdala, adding that to your body of knowledge. Yoga is a wonderful way to center, to quiet the brain so that you don't immediately go into stress. Meditation, lots of ADD people say, meditation, how can I sit down and not think thoughts? That's not what meditation is about. But if you begin to identify what are your somatic symptoms, if you have them, for me, I feel it in the temples in my head. I can feel them starting to get tense when I'm feeling stressed. If I feel that, I can identify that and do nothing more than walk away and walk out on my porch and look at the clouds for a few minutes, I may be able to stop that hijacking from happening. So all kinds of meditation, centering rituals, walking away, deep breathing, a lot of the things that we're finding now scientifically actually activate parts of our brain that cause relaxation. And we want to do as much of those kinds of things as we possibly can if we want to keep this amygdala from taking us over. I'm going to stop there. I mean, I could just talk all afternoon, but I can't. So I hope that without throwing too much at you all at once, gives you some idea of where I'm coming from about this, which is essentially that, yes, we need strategies, but we must pay attention to our stress levels. We must put things in place to deal with that, or the best strategies in the world aren't going to work.
Peggy, that's really fascinating to hear about the way our brains work. Could you talk some more about preventing overload from happening? I'm sort of trying to imagine maybe a specific example of someone who's facing, an extraordinary amount of work at the job and sort of suddenly feels really overwhelmed. What would they do to keep that from getting worse?
That's a great question. And this comes up. This has come up so much over the years that I've been coaching, that I really now start with the amygdala hijacking piece and teach my clients about that. And one of the things that we do very early on, one of the things that I'm sure many people who are listening have difficulties with, is it could be a room, it could be an office, it could be a closet, it doesn't matter what it is. But that room that needs to be straightened up, and you walk in and are assaulted visually by so many distractions. You walk in, your heart starts pounding, your head starts hurting, and it's like, I have to do this. I have to do this. I don't know where to start. I don't know how to do it. My goodness, I'm going to be at this all afternoon. And of course, what's happening is we're getting hijacked and we may not even know it. And so we walk away. So what I have many of my clients do, and they can literally declutter a room within an hour or two, is a very, very simple system. It's a system that takes out decision making. Decision making is very, very hard for us. And I'll bet a lot of people listening have had the experience of, well, I'm going to get these papers organized. And you pick up the first one and you say, oh my goodness, what do I do with this? Well, you know what? I don't think I have a file for that. So I better make a new file for that. So I'm going to go make a new file for that. And you know what? While I'm at it, maybe I ought to color code all my financial records. And the next thing we know, we've accomplished nothing. So what I ask my clients to do is go into that space, whatever it is, and for starters, take 3 boxes. And I want you to label those boxes: trash, things that I really got to put my hands on, sort of my ASAP box, and my I don't know box. And the whole idea is that they set a very reasonable amount of time, so that the overwhelm that we feel when we think we're going to be at this for hours, we cut through that by saying, okay, you're going to set an alarm for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, half hour, whatever feels good to you. Reasonable, that doesn't feel too overwhelming. You're going to go in and you're going to pick up the first couple of papers. And the first one you look at, hopefully will be an old flyer, easy to throw out. Throw it out in the trash. That one's easy. Next one is a bill that came in. Well, okay, got to put that in my ASAP box. Next one is an invitation to a dear friend's wedding. Maybe happened last year. Oh gosh, do I want to keep that? Do I want to put that in my scrapbook? Gee, I don't know what to do with that, but I hate to throw it out. We cut through that right away before any anxiety starts building. Just toss it in the I don't know box. And within a very short period of time, by taking out the indecision that creates overwhelm and stress, one can actually declutter a room in a very short period of time. And then what happens is some of my clients just work for that 10 or 15 minutes, whatever time they set. Others find that their alarm goes off. They say, well, you know what? This is going really well. I already have this little corner done. I'm just going to stick to it. Law of physics. When we're inert, we stay inert. When we're in momentum, we tend to stay in momentum. So sometimes they will just decide to just stick with it. Whichever decision they make is okay, because what we're really practicing here is we're practicing starting. We're practicing intercepting that amygdala so that we don't get that stress response, and doing something that we said we were going to do, following through on it, and when the time is up, leaving, regardless of whether it's done or not. That goes a long way over time towards countering that negative self-talk that goes on.
That's really fascinating. There are a number of questions about amygdala hijacking. People want to know more about it, but just to step backward for 1 second, someone has asked whether you could repeat the name of the 3 boxes.
Sure.
I don't know. And
Sure. And of course, one could guess that the biggest box is the I don't know box.
Right.
Because that's the one we don't know what to do with it. And that's the one that gets us so off track. So, and you can add to it. Some clients say, well, you know what, in addition to papers, I got a lot of clothes I want to take to Goodwill. Well, that's good. Add another box for that if you need to. But basically, we want to keep it really simple. So it's just ASAP. You find a check, you find a bill, you find a phone call you must make. Sort of a right now goes into the ASAP box. And then you have your biggest box, and I sometimes tell clients you might need 2 or 3 of those. Your I don't know box. But just taking that problematic decision making out of the equation it makes such a huge difference. And that feeling of overwhelm doesn't happen, so we stay in our thinking brain. And generally then we come back to the I don't know box as a separate task. But we've pulled that out of the bigger task. So the next time they walk into their office, it's like, oh my goodness, I can see the floor for the first time in 14 years.
Do you find, Peggy, that people actually do go back to the I don't know box? I'm speaking personally
Yes.
here, and I know that in my case, the I don't know box just stays there until I throw it out.
Yes. Well, and that would be fine too, actually.
Right.
Because we're just trying to eliminate that problematic decision.
So what you're really saying is don't give yourself too many decisions to make. Just make
Yes.
it simple. Yeah, that's really
very,
that's
very
great
simple.
advice.
Because then the amygdala doesn't take you over.
Right. On this amygdala question, about which people are very interested, one person's asking, is the amygdala hijacking a learned behavior, or is this something that we're born with?
No, it's actually part of our brain. It evolved over time, and it evolved originally to protect us from predators.
But I guess the ability to have your functions hijacked so that you become, so stressed. The question is that something that was learned over time, or is that something that if you have ADD, you're just born with?
Well, what my own feeling about this, and some of the research is showing that, is that there are actually differences in the makeup of the amygdala from person to person. They're finding some differences, for instance, in PTSD survivors. And they're finding some differences in people who have very, very high levels of anxiety. What I believe is that setting that aside for the moment, that the amygdala has a job designed by the brain to perceive danger. Now, for us, because we have had so many experiences of failure, which create so much anxiety and stress, that I think we just try uncle a lot faster and easier than other people do. So I don't think that it takes as much in our ADD brain for the amygdala to say, oh no, danger, danger. Whereas in someone else's brain, it might not
addresses
react
the
that
question, and someone else has asked, which is, does amygdala hijacking happen to non-ADDers as well? And you're saying, probably yes.
Oh, absolutely.
Maybe not as easily. Is that right?
Absolutely, yes. Because it's just the function, it's part of the limbic system, and it's designed to protect us. And it's just in our culture today, not too many of us have to run away from saber-toothed tigers, but we're faced with all kinds of emotional stresses all the time. And the amygdala can't tell the difference. All it knows is at the slightest bit of unease, it starts getting ready. Oh gosh, do I need to protect here? And if we can walk away, if we can do some deep breathing, if we can start inserting some affirmations that we have written ahead of time on cards that we pick up and read to ourselves, I'm shortchange it. We can sometimes stop it.
I think anything more you can say on that would be very appreciated. There's a question here from Annie who says, specifically, what are some things we can say to ourselves to help us from getting hijacked, or when we know that we're already headed into an amygdala hijack?
Well, I think one of the things that I would love it, if we have lots of time, I would love to talk about this about tapping, which is becoming and look it up on the internet. If you just go to www.tapping.com, it is an incredible technique that scientists are finding it is just incredibly helpful for PTSD, for pain. Essentially what you do is, and this is, I'm saying this because it is connected to the affirmation, there are various methods, and we don't have time to go into it, but it involves tapping on certain meridian points in your body. And as you tap on those parts of your body, you say, even though I am hurting, or even though I am feeling. Well, I think that translates very well into an affirmation. In my experience, affirmations that I used to read about in kind of woo-hoo, feel-good magazines that would say, oh, stand in front of your mirror and say, I am wonderful just the way I am. Well, I didn't believe that for a minute. So I find with myself and with my ADD clients that something that is a progressive affirmation, I am becoming, I am learning to, even though I am starting to feel stressed, I can get a handle on this. Even though I'm feeling overwhelmed, I can find another way to do this. And repeating that over and over and over again, because what we're doing, and we know this from stroke victims, we can lay down new neural pathways in our brain. And we want to get out of the old ones. And what we usually do is say, okay, Peggy, stop procrastinating. Well, all that does is reinforce the procrastination. So we're far better off affirming what we want than what we don't want. So whatever it is you want to have going on in your life, I would like to be able to work for 15 minutes on this project. Then that's what you say. I am learning to stick with this for 15 minutes. Or I am
so
learning
positive,
to...
affirmative statements. So a question here from Jennifer, who says, what would a positive strategy be for dealing with amygdala hijacking during an interpersonal communication, such as a business meeting? She says that sometimes anxiety just takes over and it's really not possible to leave the room or meditate. And so she's talking about specifically the anxiety of the interactions in a meeting.
A couple of things. First of all, one thing that we can do as much as possible, especially if it is sort of a weekly meeting and kind of it works the same way all week, every time we go to this meeting, somebody starts it and then we talk about this and then we talk about that. If it's that, especially if it's that kind of a meeting, practicing ahead of time what you can say, what you can intervene with so that it becomes automatic can be enormously helpful. The other piece is, and I just helped a client get through an interview with a magistrate, and she has exactly that problem. She gets very anxious when she's asked a direct question. And what she practiced doing that worked very well for her was to just say, hang on just 1 second, I need to think about that.
Great. So buy some time.
And just take a deep breath, and sometimes just buying yourself that little bit of time can make a big difference.
Right. On the amygdala, sort of at the end of these amygdala discussion, there are a couple of questions here from people who say, is the amygdala hijacking analogous to depression, or what is the relationship between having overwhelm and ADD and depression, and how should they distinguish between those?
They're really different. Amygdala hijacking, by and large, is about that anxiety response, that fear response. Now, there can be fear that's mixed in with depression, but it is different and it's sourced differently. I mean, you can certainly have both happening.
Right.
But the amygdala piece really is about protection from a perceived danger to the person, which could be a physical danger or it could be an emotional danger.
Okay.
And true chemical depression comes from our brain chemistry that's telling us that the world is a very dark place.
Mm-hmm. So Simon, who asked this question, how do I know if this is an ADD or a depression, describes his symptoms as saying, he says, I don't feel stressed. I just feel a complete lack of interest and an inability to focus on anything. So it sounds less like what you're describing as an amygdala hijacking and more in the direction of a depression, if that's not that we can diagnose Simon, but the words he's using don't correspond to how you're describing stress, anxiety. I don't think.
I would say that's true. The only thing to just keep an awareness about is that one of the responses to an amygdala hijacking is freezing.
Right.
So, there is that little piece to it, but I agree with you that it sounds more like it is a generalized depression or a dysthymic.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Any other tips for knowing when the overwhelm is about to start? A couple of people are saying, what else can I do to sort of see this coming?
I think first of all, most of us know that there are certain areas of our life that we put off, that we just don't wanna. I think whenever we are feeling those I don't want us, that's a big clue that there's something about this that feels very stressful to me. And whenever I have one of those I don't want us coming on, and I can remember Kate, she and I used to do a lot of coaching back and forth with each other, and I would sometimes call her and tell her, I got these files to do, and I just don't wanna. And she used to say, well, then don't do it right now. Let's see when I can come over and sit with you. A body double is a great way to get past those I don't want us and stop that overwhelm before it happens. There's something about having another person, not helping necessarily, just sitting there that can help tamp that down. I think part of it is knowing ourselves well enough to identify those areas of our lives that we tend to either get really anxious about or just don't want to do, or just know that I'm going to feel so frustrated when I have to do that. That in and of itself is a good clue. And the next step, which I often do with clients, is to have them really start building their awareness, checking in with themselves several times a day to check on their emotional temperature. how are you, and some of them set alarms a couple of times in the morning and a couple of times in the afternoon. And when that alarm goes off, it can serve a number of purposes depending on what they're working on. One of them is to just check in. Where are you? How are you feeling emotionally? Are you feeling pretty much in control? Are you starting to have some worries pop up? Is your heart starting to pound a little bit? Sometimes there are somatic symptoms. In fact, very often there are somatic symptoms, and they're different from person to person. In one person it may be just a little butterfly in your stomach, or you find yourself clenching your fists.
Right.
For me, it's that feeling in my temples. Not all the time, but if you can start tuning in on what are those little clues that let me know I'm starting to get stressed, then you have a shot at interrupting that pattern before it starts.
A number of people are on the webinar are asking about procrastination, just not starting. I'm asking whether overwhelm is really what's going on in those cases.
I think, in my opinion, what's happening is you have your core ADD behaviors and the glitches in the executive functioning that we don't quite understand. And those include transitioning, include decision making, pre-planning, prioritizing, all of those things that are generally parts of a task. So I think that we have your basic core symptoms going on, exacerbated by the stress and the overwhelm. Now, we can't necessarily fix whatever the glitch is, but we can minimize its impact if we can get a handle on the overwhelm. And that's why I have many of my clients who practice starting. That's what they do. They're not working on a particular goal to finish anything in particular. They are practicing starting. And that usually means that whatever it is they want to do, they make a decision, they write it down, they say it out loud, they say it to me, that they are going to go into that bedroom closet and they are going to work on it for 10 minutes. Now, they may go into that closet and stare at the walls for 10 minutes. That's okay, because they're practicing starting. They're practicing how to have an experience of not putting off something that you've put off forever and ever and ever.
Wow.
And
yeah.
after they do that often enough, many of them will say, I couldn't believe it. I actually started doing something in there.
Marley has written, I'm a recent widow getting ready to move to a new house, and I'm having extreme difficulty wrapping my head around packing and purging for the move. Any good suggestions? It's sort of the ultimate paralysis and overwhelm situation for any ADD or for most people, for that matter.
Yes, and I would love to spend an afternoon or two talking about this, because it involves so many things, and it is a process for sure. I would suggest, though, that some of the things that we're talking about here do apply. That instead of thinking about planning the whole thing with all of the different pieces, that she just arbitrarily decide, okay, this afternoon I'm going to work on this area, this piece, this 2x4 section in my dining room, or whatever it may be, to break it down as much as possible into smaller pieces. Because if the task is broken down into smaller pieces, I probably could clean out that 2x4 foot square area over there. But pack up this whole room? No way. I can't do that. It's too much. So a very quick down and dirty answer, and it's certainly not completely satisfying, but would be as much as possible to figure out how she can take these tasks and take them apart, because one of the things we forget is there is virtually not a task on the planet that is really one part. Our students in our training class, we have them make a list of the 10 steps of changing a light bulb. I mean, you change a light bulb. Yeah, no, you do not just change a light bulb. You might need a ladder. You might need a stool. You might need to go to the store to buy a new bulb. You need to figure out which bulbs, and on and on and on and on. It is not just one step. So the more that she can take seemingly a task, break it down into small pieces, write it down, and then have that piece of paper in hand and say, okay, this morning I'm going to put all the pencils together for my desk, or whatever it is. That will help.
There's a suggestion here from someone who, in sympathy to, who says, I just went through this last year, and my solution was just to pack everything and do the purging and sorting on the other end, on the unpack side.
Yes, and if you are really stopped dead in your tracks because of indecision, it's just like that I don't know box. It's the same idea.
Just pack it all up.
Yeah, and of course the only downside of that is sort of what happened here when I moved back to a house I had lived in 25 years ago, and some of my stuff was still in the basement in boxes. However, it was much easier to throw it away now than it was then.
Right.
But yes, that is actually an absolutely wonderful suggestion. If push comes to shove and you can't get yourself to do it in small steps, yes, pack it up, get out of there. There's probably a deadline, and then figure out from the other end. Hire a coach to help you. Find a friend to come over there and help.
Thank you to Kate for that suggestion. Number of questions, Peggy, about negative or hypercritical people in your life. Husbands mentioned, family members mentioned, who perceive your inability to get started or to do something as laziness, just not being willing to deal with it. And people on the webinar are saying, what do you say? How do you handle that kind of negativity around you?
I think that there are a couple of things to try. Sometimes the PS to all of this is, however, sometimes we have to accept the fact that there is nothing that we can do or say to get someone else who doesn't walk in our shoes to understand. Now, having said that, I think it's worth a shot. I think the more that you can learn about brain functioning, not in a scientific kind of way, not that deeply or that intensely, but enough so that you can at least know in your own head when something comes at you, like, you mean you didn't do that again? The first step is to be able inside your head to say, yes, and I know why. To work on that judgment, that self-judgment, that has to come first, always has to come first. Have to work on that until we can become very matter-of-fact so that it no longer gets us emotionally. Because again, if it's still getting us emotionally, when that stuff gets leveled at us, what happens? We go into overwhelm, and then we can't think, and we don't know what to say.
Right.
So we have to start with self-knowledge and talking to ourselves in a new way that is charge neutral without judgment.
Okay. Seems like really great advice. Question about completing things. Some folks who are saying, once I get started, with all the issues that come with getting started, it's also hard to finish, to complete the task.
Yes, and that is absolutely true. I think one of the things that happens is we just wear out. It's like we just have so many resources on board, and it's often so hard to get started in the first place that by the time we started, we're already exhausted. And I think, again, that is one of those things that part of the work, a big part of that work is to make that okay for yourself. This is something else that, God love her, and I miss her terribly, is I used to call Kate sometimes when this would happen, and she would say, Peggy, why are you beating your head against the wall? Well, I don't know. I just really thought I needed to do this. And she would always say to me, just walk away from it now, because you're not getting anywhere and all you're doing is beating yourself up. Just walk away and make a decision about when you're going to come back and give it another shot.
Okay.
And I think that that is very, very, very good advice. And what's so important is that we get out of that negative thinking where we judge it, where we can get to the place where we can say, okay, I gave it a really good shot. I've been at this for a half hour, 45 minutes, whatever it is. I have made some steps towards where I want to go. So I'm going to now make the decision to stop. And I think it is that making the decision in a conscious way that makes all the difference in the world, instead of just reactively kind of throwing your arms up and saying, well, I can't do this, and walking away. No, to actually consciously say out loud, I'm choosing to stop this now, and I will come back when I have more resources on board.
Okay. So don't expect yourself to necessarily finish the task.
Correct.
Just keep at it. Give it another 15 minutes at another time, or whatever the strategy that works. Okay.
Exactly.
That's really great. Any suggestions on the dreaded housework laundry? There are a number of people here, and we all know ADD moms, just or dads, I suppose, out running households. Find those kinds of tasks just among the most difficult to cope with.
Yes, and I don't think there is a one size fits all for that. I have some clients who have found that the only way that they can do it is to literally schedule it in their planners, just like a doctor's appointment. There are others who are so resistant to structure that it's like, oh, no way am I going to put this in my schedule. Like, one more thing I have to do, and I have to do.
Right. It feels even more onerous, yeah.
Yeah, and so I think that the answer is very different from person to person. One thing that does seem to be sort of universal is if we can anchor it to something else so that we're not doing it in isolation. So I'm going to watch that documentary about whatever. So, hey, I know it'd be a great idea. I'll throw the wash in, and then while I'm watching the documentary, I'll fold it. Linking it to something else seems
that's great advice, yeah.
Be helpful.
Questions here about helping a child or living with a child who also has problems, say, for example, getting out the door in the morning, how to help that, how to make that work, especially when the parent also has ADD or ADHD.
Yeah, I am a big believer in lists, and my son, both my kids have ADD. They're grown now, thankful good Lord. I'm not sure how we made it, but we did. But lists. I used to have a list posted next to the door that listed what needed to be in the backpack, so that we could both of us could just go down that list. Let's see, lunch, yep. Lunch money, yep. This, yes, go down the list. Used to post that by the door. Make it ahead of time, of course. I had a list that I kept on the kitchen counter. So every day after school, the first thing you did when you walked in the door was came over and was a very oppositional kid too. Come over and read the list. Hang up your jacket. Hang up your backpack. Put this here. Put that there. That probably saved our lives.
Wow.
Because we're not good in the moment of remembering, we remember after the fact, after the kid gets on the bus, oh my goodness, there was that form I had to send with him. So for the parent, especially the ADD parent, to set aside some time, it doesn't have to be a lot of time, but set aside some time the night before the moment happens and the anxiety that goes with it, where you can kind of visualize, think through, okay, let's see, what is our morning going to look like? What is Johnny going to need for school tomorrow? And write it down and tape it where you're going to see it. Can help a lot.
Right. Now, I had a friend who used to call her kids 5 things. She'd say, this is the morning. She said, have you done your 5 things? And then she had
Yes.
the list of 5 things, and everybody in the family knew the 5 things. Right. And it was sort of code for before you went out the door in the morning.
Right. And of course, with ADD, that doesn't guarantee that they're all going to get done.
Right.
But at least you got a better shot.
Exactly. Here is a person, Linda, who says, do you have any suggestions for an overactive and critical mind? It just keeps running nonstop. Ooh, that's painful.
Yes. Very, very, very painful. And I'll tell you, even for those ADD people who may not have that chronically, I think that is a huge issue for the majority of at least the clients that I work with. It is that critical, that self-criticizing voice that has become so ingrained in our consciousness. And the best way I know, and it is not easy, and it takes a lot of time and persistence and deep breaths, is to practice and have ready cards, affirmations, statements, and tie that to a check-in with yourself a couple of times a day. And I have virtually every client do this in the beginning. Check in. What are you saying to yourself? If it's critical, then pick up one of those cards and make sure that it's something that resonates with you, that you can believe. Can't be too far out there because our brains just don't believe it. But have something at the ready that as soon as that negative statement comes out, you replace it with a positive one. And it's not just Pollyanna, woo-hoo, positive thinking. It is actually starting to create new neural pathways in the brain.
Okay.
And it is important, and it is not easy. But if you stick to it and do it and do it and do it and do it and catch yourself as often as you can and replace a progressive, I am learning to, I am wanting to, I believe that someday I can, whatever that might be, over time, it will start to quiet that voice.
Okay, that's great. I just want to say that the feedback on the webinar, people are just really writing in to thank you and say how helpful and how wonderful this has been. In fact, one person says, hey, Peggy, can you come and live in my house 24 hours a day and be my coach? So everyone's finding your comments extremely helpful, and it's very grateful. So before we run out of time, I just want to make sure to fit that in. Let's see if we can take another more questions. A few questions. This is excellent. People are writing, this is great. I'm crying because you understand. Thank you, Peggy. Thank you. This went pretty amazing. I'm a writer who can't write. I have an amazing ideas, lots of research, outlines, and yet when I try to write, all hell breaks loose and I never get to it. I'm going to put that together, that's some carry, with another person who says, I really want everything to be perfect. So I have a hard time starting because of the desire to have things be perfect.
Yes. That editing as you go. And I get that one big time. 2 quick thoughts. The one is that the 10 or 15 minute rule is a really good way to address that just not being able to start, so that you just make a decision, you plan it, you write it in your calendar that 11 o'clock on Wednesday morning, I'm going to go sit at my computer for 15 minutes and write. Well, maybe you will, maybe you won't. But every time you follow through on it, you are actually practicing that process of choice, follow through, finish, get up and leave. And we don't have many of those experiences. So over time, that can help that starting process. The perfectionism, you might want to try turning the screen off.
Wow.
I had to do that because I am a perfectionist when it comes to grammar and spelling, etc., etc. And I actually have a client or two who are actually being able to do some writing by not stopping themselves with the editing because they can't see it.
Right. So just keep it going and don't worry right now about editing.
See if you can get it out of your brain through your fingertips, and you can always come back and edit later.
Okay.
And see if you can get past that. Yeah, that perfectionism. That is a tough one. But I have personally found that helpful.
Okay, that's super. Well, one last question. How can I just channel these great ideas into reality is a question. So I'll throw that out to you, Peggy, as your last bit of advice to the folks on this webinar. If you could say one thing that would help them really start to put some of these ideas into reality, what would your advice be?
I think one of the things I would do is really sit down, maybe with a journal, maybe with a notebook, and just start writing some of it down. I would really like to continue working at this, that, or the other. I really think that the idea of doing this could be helpful. Taking it out of your brain, capturing it on paper, where you can come back and review it. I mean, that's what we do so much in coaching with accountability, is client prep forms, where they essentially write out their intentions and then can go back. And it's wonderful, too, for going back a few weeks down the road and seeing, oh, you know what? I actually worked on that awareness building stuff 3 times this week. Good for me. Good for me. So I think that writing it down on note cards, in a log, in a ledger, anything. If you're not particularly a writer, that's okay. Just write phrases down, or just take some quiet time and just reflect. Just reflect on, you know what, I can't do this all. Nobody can. So what one piece would I like to pull out and start working on?
Okay.
And I would really encourage people. I've done a lot of things in the ADD world in the last 30 years. Far and away, the most fulfilling, exciting work I have ever done is in coaching. And I would encourage anyone who is even vaguely thinking about a way to really get themselves going with support. There is nothing like coaching to help you do that. Just having that cheerleader in your court.
Yeah, absolutely. Lots of interest in coaching. And I just want to say to the folks on the webinar that we have a coach directory on our website. There's also a wonderful organization called ACO, Association of Coaches. And any other suggestions, Peggy, for finding a coach, an ADD coach?
Those two are great resources. And if you just went and typed in ADD coaching for adults, you're going to come up with all kinds of listings.
Right. And that we're sort of out of time, and we could probably do a whole other session on how to find a coach. But we do have some articles on our website that help you, questions to ask a potential coach, sort of help you pick one, because you're right, there are lots and lots of them out there. So,
and I would just, along those lines, I would encourage people, if you decide to go the route of trying to find a coach, make sure that you do interview a couple of coaches.
Right.
Fit is very important. You want to feel comfortable with this person. There are a lot of different fee levels out there. I take care of special fees through added dimension coaching. And so don't let fear of not having sufficient funds stop you from pursuing it. There are lots of ways we can work that out.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. I can't thank you enough.
Thanks for some great questions and
Okay.
Great audience.
Thank you. So, bye, everyone.
Bye.
For more Attitude podcasts and information on living well with attention deficit, visit attitudemag.com. That's ADDitude Mag.com.